Most likely, if I was just a regular Canadian girl who had never been to Israel, who had no Jewish upbringing, very possibly I'd be on the streets protesting against Israel as well, because Israel has done such a bad job at portraying our story and our narrative.
This is a Visegrad 24 series about the Israel-Hamas War.
I'm Stefan Tompson, and we're here with a Visegrad 24 interview from the ground in Israel. I'm in Tel Aviv, and today I'm with Israel's biggest makeup and beauty influencer, Ashley Bakshi.
Hi. Can't you tell? Makeup is my thing.
You look excellent. You look gorgeous. Ashley, tell the audience first who you are, what it is you do, how you arrived in Israel, because obviously you have a very Western accent.
Yes. So I was born in Canada.
Sure.
And I came to Israel to volunteer when I was 21. And I wanted to work in politics or diplomacy. So I did my master's degree in government with a specialization in counterterrorism and homeland security. And then I worked in the Ministry of Defense. And while I was working there, I discovered the wonderful world of makeup tutorials on YouTube. And that was always just a hobby and a passion. And so I started uploading these videos in Hebrew. I was the first one to ever do it in Hebrew. Yep. This was 13 years ago, and it really blew up.
So early days of YouTube, huh?
Yeah, I was
very early.
Definitely in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And it got really popular. I started hosting TV shows, and I have my own cosmetics brand now. Wow. And so it was very good and very successful.
Mm-hmm. And your audience is broadly, tell us about the audience that you have.
Because my content was primarily in Hebrew, the majority of my followers were in Israel or Hebrew speakers around the world. Obviously, mostly women. But 2 years ago is when I realized that we are dealing with an information war and that Israel is really losing it. And so I started uploading videos in my native language, just kind of showing the Israeli side of the story, which I felt wasn't online anywhere. And so I slowly started gaining followers abroad as well. Mm-hmm. Now my content is, I would say, 95% in English.
Sure.
Since October 7th, I haven't done anything beauty related. I feel like I've just, the world needs more realness online. And obviously it's kind of ironic.
It's ironic coming from a person who does makeup, right?
Right. It's really ironic. Talking about truth.
Yeah.
Hiding behind the mask of makeup. Yeah, it really bothered me, especially being an English speaker and following people online around the world, seeing that there is a lot of misinformation, and that misinformation is causing people to go to the streets and demonstrate for something that they really don't understand.
It's quite unusual for an influencer. I mean, Western influencers, when I think of Western influencers, they really stick to their niche. They rarely venture into the world of politics. They rarely venture into the world of talking about patriotism. In a way, you sound like an Israeli patriot. Are you an Israeli patriot?
Absolutely. I am a Zionist. And I'm a proud Zionist. And anyone who doesn't understand, they've hijacked the term Zionist as well. They call me online, they'll say oh, you Zionist, as if it's a bad thing. I'm yay, they called me a Zionist. Because I see that. They don't understand what the word Zionism means.
What's the impact been on your brand? I mean, you're someone who does beauty, you do makeup, you have a massive audience, you have a brand, you have a business around this. Here you are talking about something that is incredibly divisive, something that is, we've seen the protests across the West. How does suddenly talking about these issues impact your brand and your business?
So I can say that I was guilty of being afraid to take a political stand on my platforms in the past, especially with the internal politics that we had in Israel over the past year.
Sure.
I didn't come out and openly say who I voted for or if I support a judicial reform or don't. Because that was really controversial, and we were at the point where I was afraid that if I took one stand or the other,
it would cost you.
It would cost me, with especially followers, but also with brand deals. When we're talking about support for Israel, obviously everybody in my country feels more or less the same way today. We might have a divide amongst who we're going to vote for, but we all agree that this is a just war, and we've all felt the impact of October 7th. I myself have a cousin who is still hostage. My husband's cousin was murdered at the party. There isn't anybody who wasn't affected. And so,
but Israel's a small market, and it's, it's what, 8 million people, 9 million people live in Israel. Right. you have an audience in the West. You have an audience. I mean, I'm assuming you're selling your products to Westerners as well, right?
I am, and in fact, one of the things that I wanted to do before October 7th, and I was halfway there, was to start to get my brand really sold in retail in Europe and across the world. I know that is seriously harming the chances of that happening. I know that there are going to be big retail chains who are not going to want to be having an Israeli company on their shelves right now. But it is something that I had to decide for myself and say, what's the good in having this platform if I can't use it for what I truly believe in? And so I know, I mean, there is definitely an economic hit. I haven't earned anything since October 6th. And I'm lucky enough to have earned enough money over the past 12 years that I can absorb that. Mm-hmm. But there are definitely going to be economic implications for me in the future that I'm going to have to rethink.
So what is it that drives a young, beautiful woman with a massive following and a business who's talking about makeup to suddenly become this proud Zionist advocate and a vocal one at that?
I'm a Libra, so if you believe in zodiac, justice is a big thing for me, and I always felt that. I really did. Even on like university campus in Canada 20 years ago, I created an advocacy club for Israel that was only me and like a few evangelical students, because I was really bothered by the injustice of people saying things like apartheid and occupation and words, and especially now with the word like genocide. These words are being taken out of context, and I just feel like I owe it to myself to be true, and things that bother me, I'm going to speak up about them. And so that's where I am right now. I feel like we've seen the gap in terms of our country not really stepping in and fighting this information war over the past 20 years. And so I feel like if my government's not going to do it, I'm going to do it. I'll figure out how I can make money after. I don't know. If there's any organizations that want to pay me to come speak, that's great. But I'll figure it out. I think it's like one of those things that you feel deep in your stomach where you're like, this is greater than me. This is bigger than Israel too. Like I really see the geopolitics in it. And I see the young generation, like that woke generation on TikTok, literally saying Osama bin Laden was right. And I'm like, okay, hold on. We got to talk about this.
Do you feel that Israel is part of the West?
Wow, that is such a good question. I think our mistake is that we thought we were. We're right in the Middle East. And I think our trying to be West actually played into the narrative that is being used against us now, that we're these like white European colonizers. And people looking at me, it's very easy to say, oh, she's clearly white, she's clearly European. And I always add, I'm white passing. Like when you're Jewish, you're not white, but whatever, that's a whole other story. Sure. But at the end of the day, the majority of our country, you've been here, you've seen it with your own eyes, the majority of our country are of Middle Eastern descent, Jews coming from Iraq, North Africa, Syria. As much as we are modern, I think it's a mistake to say that we are super West, because there is still a huge cultural difference between Israel and the United States, or Israel and the UK. And I think that culturally, we are way more similar to our surrounding Arab countries. And I think trying to solve Middle East problems from a Western viewpoint doesn't work. We've seen that in Iraq, we've seen that in Afghanistan, and we're seeing it in Israel as well.
That's a really interesting perspective. I mean, obviously, to me, Israel is part of the Western world from a perspective of values. Without Judaism, there is no Christendom. A Polish thinker and philosopher, Felix Konechny, defined the West as he called it the Latin civilization, and it was built on Roman law, Greek philosophy, and Calvary and Golgotha, and essentially the death of Christ and the resurrection, the birth of Christendom. And those three hills are the foundation of the West. And it's an interesting perspective. But you're right. In many ways, I do feel that Israel is being judged as a Western country attempting to solve very complicated matters. And also, I think there's no understanding in the West of how endangered Israel is. That for a Frenchman whose neighbors are Germany and Spain and Switzerland and Belgium and England's across the Channel, you can't understand having Egypt, Lebanon, Hezbollah there, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Fatah in the West Bank. You grew up in the West, you grew up in Canada. Why do you think so many people in the West are marching in the streets with Palestinian flags? What's happened?
So simple.
Is it?
For me, it's so simple.
Okay.
Because like you said, I grew up there as well. And so I grew up with this generation of building, like in education and everywhere, where, DEI, and I'm a big supporter of liberal rights. I'm a big supporter of equality. But the narrative fits with this extreme woke ideology. So I'll explain. We have been taught about the Black rights movements and the indigenous genocides that have been done in Canada and the United States. And it is almost made like the white man guilty of everything. Like everything in the world is his fault. And technically, if we go back through history, it's kind of true. It's kind of true.
Wow. I'll let you talk, Ashley. Tell me how I'm guilty.
But basically, so now everything's been so polarized that if you're white, you're bad. If you're a male, you're bad. And there's no there's no nuance, exactly. And so when American Jews are primarily of Ashkenazi or European descent, and in America, they're looking at the Jews beside them and they're like, oh, they're clearly all like white men. They've colonized Israel. This plays into the same story. And we're seeing it with the radical, canceling Thanksgiving and all of those kind of ideologies. It's all meshing together. And I think the real problem is that Jews trying to assimilate because of anti-Semitism have been suppressing the true narrative of Judaism. And I think that's where the word Zionism has been shifted from meaning the desire of Jews from all over the world in the diaspora to just go back to their indigenous homeland to meaning imperialism or colonization, which it's simply not that. If anyone knows anything about history, it's clearly not that. It's that the Palestinian narrative that has been pushed with a lot of money on university campuses and in the media, coming in from all of these very wealthy Arab countries around, has been really playing into the hands of like the extreme woke ideologies as well. And it's actually ridiculous because we've been seeing organizations such as Queers for Palestine, which for us here in Israel, we look at that and we just laugh because we're like, that makes no sense. And I can see how
they for KFC.
Exactly. And so a lot of people are like, how? I can see how. I can see that progression. And like I say many, many times, most likely, if I was just a regular Canadian girl who had never been to Israel, who had no Jewish upbringing, very possibly I'd be on the streets protesting against Israel as well, because Israel has done such a bad job at portraying our story and our narrative. And so I get it. I don't call every person who marches on the streets an anti-Semite.
Because there are many of them, and I do agree here. I think many Westerners are simply misinformed, and the Iranian, Chinese, Russian alliance and their disinformation machine, which is a very powerful one, it's well funded, it's well executed, you have to give it to them. Their propaganda is incredibly effective. What they have achieved on TikTok, the studies that I have seen from NCRI have shown that for every piece of content with a pro-Israeli hashtag, we're bringing it home, free the hostages, stand with Israel, there were 57 videos with a pro-Palestinian hashtag. So that just scale of content, and also, of course, the Arab world, which is increasingly online, talking about almost 2 billion Muslims, suddenly being very vocal in this.
Absolutely. And the algorithm itself harms. So I've learned, I use Instagram and TikTok,
sure,
and I don't get any views on TikTok. None.
It's the same thing with Visegrad 24.
Right, so it's
when we started making content that portrayed what I believe the truth, in the sense we were talking about Hamas tunnels, we were talking about how the Iron Dome works. These were informational, educational videos with a slightly pro-Israeli stance, in the sense of we were anti-terrorist, in that sense we were pro-Israeli. The views, actually our account was suspended. We had to have an intervention of a friend in the tech industry in the US reach out to TikTok management personally to have our account restored.
I think it's crazy how like you said, I made videos where I'm literally sitting in front of a camera and just talking, right? And I didn't show anything controversial. I was just talking.
There's
Nothing.
no violence, there's no B-roll, it's just you, your face.
And those videos are taken down because they're violating community guidelines. And yet all I see on TikTok are dead Palestinians.
Sure.
And that's okay.
Sure.
And so clearly there is a very calculated effort from China through TikTok to brainwash the West. And so I don't understand how Western countries are not outlawing this platform. I just don't understand it.
I mean, the way that we saw the Osama bin Laden letter be proliferated across TikTok, where it took 2, 3, 4 days to rehabilitate Osama bin Laden in the eyes of Gen Z in the West. The fact that China was able to do that is unreal. The power of the tool, and you have to say it. I mean, we both use TikTok. I mean, clearly you've made content for it. You understand how it works. You know it. The dopamine hit you get, right? You're scrolling and you think, oh, the next one's gonna feed that dopamine hit that I need.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you something about the left in the West. There is a broad sense that the home of the Jews, of the Jewish diaspora, has often been on the political left, in the sense of the Jews have stood with civil rights movements across the last decades. It's a general sort of obviously there've been very right-wing Jews. I'm not saying that all Jews are left-wing, yes, but it's been the traditional home of Jews. Do you sense a betrayal of the left? I mean, you're a liberal.
Yes.
You're probably positioned somewhere on the center left, and yet here you are, finding yourself attacked by people on the extreme left or on the far left, or even just the general left.
So, again, with the terms also of left and right, that becomes so complicated when you live in Israel.
Yeah.
Because when I was living in Canada, things were very clear. It was like, I believe in gay rights, I believe in women's rights, I believe in freedom of speech. Okay, so I'm probably more left-wing. Once you come to Israel, you're like, hold on a second, I believe in this, but I also believe in Jewish education. And so in Israel, that plays a little bit more to the right. Or when it comes to my financial or economic perspective, I would say I lean a little bit more to the right. And so everything just gets all like mishmashed. And I think that's why we have like 17 political parties in Israel as well, which is one of our big problems.
But you have a low threshold. There's a weirdly low threshold to get into. I think you need 4 members of the Knesset to get a political party. Yeah, it's too low.
Like with that, it means I could go to the Knesset. You know.
You should. Next step for Ashley Bakshi is the
something
Knesset.
I'm thinking of. I definitely think, especially when we look at the United States, and again, I'm not from America, but you're right. The Jews typically voted more Democrat.
Sure.
And it's definitely a little bit of a stab in the back. But I will say, surprisingly, I have no complaints for Joe Biden. You know, we've seen him stand with Israel, and I think I was a little bit surprised. I thought it would be less of a supportive response. Do I think that if there was a right-wing government in the United States, things would have played out differently? I probably think this would have ended a long time ago. Perhaps wouldn't even have happened. I don't know. I mean, I'm not.
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't have a psychic ball.
Right. It's just speculation. Yeah. But just coming back, I was actually just in Washington last week, and I spoke to senators and congresspeople from both parties. And I can say that the support for at least the hostages, like the humanitarian aspect of this conflict right now, it's definitely a bipartisan issue in the United States.
The pro-Palestinian, pro-ceasefire demographic is so much more vocal and visible than... I mean, we're talking about American citizens who are being held hostages by Hamas, by a fundamentalist Islamist terrorist organization. And we're not seeing widespread bring them home, free US hostages. I've not seen any of that. All I've seen is American flags getting torn down, replaced by Palestinian ones, angry men in keffiyeh shouting their heads over the street, Shahada flags reminiscent of ISIS in terms of aesthetics, certainly, and somewhere on the line of whether it should be legal or not to have the Shahada flag displayed. vandalism of cafes, of Starbucks, vandalism of banks,
Zara.
Zara
somehow is involved
because the marketing shoot wasn't to the taste of the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine crew. So I'm not seeing. I understand it sort of politically. I'm sort of asking in a societal sense, in a community sense. There hasn't been. Everywhere you go in Israel, you will see "Bring them home." You'll see graffiti saying "Bring them home." You'll have photos of hostages. You have posters, the same ones that were torn down by angry mobs in the street in the U.S. They're everywhere. But U.S. citizens are being held hostage. How do we get here?
Well, I'll tell you something interesting. Being in the U.S. last week, I found out that there are over 70 U.S. hostages being held in all sorts of countries right now, in Venezuela, by the Taliban, and American citizens don't know that either.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I think generally the way I felt being in America, and I can say I was pleasantly surprised, because when I went to America, I took off my Star of David because I didn't know, if it would be dangerous for me. And being there on the ground, I was surprised to see that this radical, really loud and noisy group that we see online taking down the flags, it's still definitely the minority in the United States. And so I kind of was like, well, at least that, because I was afraid that they were the majority. I'm afraid of the silent majority. That's who I'm afraid of. It's the ones that if we go back 80 years in the Holocaust, it was the silent majority that allowed the Holocaust to just, happen right in front of them. They're the ones that I'm afraid of, because it is so clear. If you know that you support Israel in this just war, if you know that it's not okay to take hostages, if you know that October 7th, no matter what, is not okay, that is not justified, then speak up. Then don't just, be like, I agree with you. No, speak up. And so I think we're starting to see Gwyneth Paltrow finally 3 months later put up a story saying rape is not resistance. And a lot of people shamed her, being like, three months too late. I'm like, no.
Better late than never.
Absolutely. And I'm saying, I think we should commend these people who are using their platforms to speak up. I understand the ramifications. It's scary when you see online, when you feel like online, and again, I think it's a lot of because the money and the bots and everything that's been pushing it. So you feel like, wait, the entire world is screaming ceasefire now. And so as a celebrity...
It does feel like that online.
Absolutely, it does. And I think that's also one of the things we're afraid of is okay, so we know, surveys have showed that the older generation supports Israel mostly. It's the younger generation where we're having the problem. And so, are these the future decision makers of the West? That's scary. But I also think that the younger generations, as we've seen with Vietnam War and a lot of things in history, they're the ones who are also, they have the time. They don't have kids and real jobs that they have to be committed to. And they live in this idealized fantasy world where they think that, peace and love and no war. Sometimes you need war. When your country is surrounded by terrorists, sometimes you need war. And the reason we're in this position right now in Israel is because we've postponed this war for so many years, because we didn't want to see so many innocent people dying, because we knew that there would be extreme outrage around the world. We know the organizations like the United Nations, we knew we would be condemned. And so we postponed it for so long that an attack of this massive scale was allowed to happen. And so I just hope as an Israeli that my government and my future governments have learned from this. It's that you don't wait until you get that international support to defend our country, because we're never going to get it. We're never going to have it. And I really hope that we see, I'm not a person who wants war at all, but none of us do. But I really hope we're not making the same mistake with Hezbollah, with Iran. I think the whole entire world should be stepping in when it comes to Iran. What a lot of people don't see here, and I think you and I both see it, is that Israel-Palestine, these are just pawns in a much bigger game. Much bigger game. And I think that the West, that's procrastinating, it's going to hit us in our face. It is totally going to backfire and hit us in our face. And like you said, that privileged Western life that people can't understand it.
They take it for granted.
They take it for granted, and they're America has its enemies too. Yeah, but not on your border.
They are within. The enemy is within, and it's a terrifying thing. And I wanted to ask you about our allies. I know that, well, your allies, rather, Israeli allies. You went to the US and you spoke with evangelical Christians, and I know that when you were a student, you had evangelicals in your pro-Zionist group.
Right.
Tell me about your conversations with evangelicals and that friendship and alliance. I know the evangelicals have been very supportive of Israel for many years.
Every church that I go to, I come out crying, bawling hysterically, because I'm so emotionally touched by really seeing the humanity in these people. And I think something that's been very apparent to me is that this interfaith dialogue is the only way we can actually win against extremism. And I call on
This
Muslims.
is not a Jewish cause. This is a much broader cause than a Jewish one.
Absolutely.
It's not uniquely Israeli or Jewish.
Absolutely. And I call on more Muslim leaders to come out and condemn rape.
And have they?
I mean, I haven't seen enough.
But you've seen some.
I've seen some.
Okay.
I've seen some. And
I haven't seen any. So to me, it's encouraging to hear that.
So the ones I've seen
Sure.
are ones that live in the UAE or live in Morocco because they understand. I haven't seen any that live in the West. That's what's really interesting.
And have you tried to speak to Muslim leaders in Western countries?
Not personally yet. Okay. I don't know any yet. But I think that...
But you would be open to go and speak at a mosque?
Absolutely. If I wasn't fearful of my life, let's be honest, because a Jew coming into a mosque in the West can actually be a pretty dangerous thing these days. But I truly believe that having, we've seen imams here in Israel come out and condemn Hamas because they live here and they understand what a world would look like if Hamas ran a country. If they ran Israel, they understand that. They don't want to be a part of that. I definitely call on Muslim influencers if they would like to be in touch with me. I've actually reached out to many.
Okay.
That are online, that are shaming me, that are taking, bits and pieces of my videos and trying to make me look like, and trying to make me look like, exactly. And I've sent them direct messages and said to them, I can see you're really passionate about it. So am I. I believe in dialogue. I would love to have like an Instagram live with you. And they either make up excuses of why they're too busy or they just never get back to me. And I think if you're so sure that your position is correct, you shouldn't be afraid to come
to air those ideas in the marketplace of ideas.
Let's talk about it. And I can, as an Israeli and as a Zionist Jew, I can openly say there are legitimate Palestinian grievances, and I am willing to recognize them. But it's only once the pro-Palestinian side is willing to listen to us, and we can both listen to each other, can we possibly move forward. But the truth is, they don't want a solution.
We are open as Visegrad 24 to interviewing any Muslim leaders, imams, Muslim influencers. We will give you a platform. You can do a space on Twitter or on X. We're happy to interview you, and I'm sure that Ashley mimics that sentiment. No, we are also. This is what you're saying is incredibly important because actually, I've sort of almost given up. We went to Ramallah, we went to the West Bank, we went to speak with Muslims. We wanted to get the other perspective. And the answers that we got in Ramallah, it was either, I can't say what I think, and the reason is because I will not get a work permit in Israel because I will air my be it anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist, or anti-Semitic views, or there was a fear if they were sympathetic to Israel and they were opposed to Hamas, they were afraid of the Palestinian Authority. And I really felt for these people in the West Bank. I mean, there was a part of me goes out to be held in that situation where you're fearful for your work if you speak one way and obviously the wrong way because you're supportive of Hamas, but fearful of the other one because you're living under an autocratic regime. There have been no elections in Gaza since 2006 or 2007 when Hamas took power, and since Fatah took power in the West Bank. So I really do, there's an empathy to me, but I am upset that none of the leaders, the Muslim leaders in the West, have spoken.
Well, that's exactly that. I can understand, and like you said, I can sympathize with the people living under the Palestinian Authority or living under Hamas. But it's the ones that live in America that you can openly have a conversation with me, and we can agree to disagree, but let's have that conversation. But it's like I was saying before, Israel has proven throughout history that it is willing to make peace with whoever it wants to. Okay, we've made peace with entire armies that came out to destroy us on the day we were established, and we've made peace with them. We literally made peace with Jordan. And, you know, if we know the history, then the West Bank was occupied from Jordan. That's Jordanian, if anything, right? And if we're supposed to give it back, we're supposed to give it back to Jordan. We made peace with Jordan. Jordan was like, we don't want it. Same story with Gaza, right? Egypt was like, we don't want it. But Israel has shown throughout time that it wants to make peace with whoever is willing to. It has made numerous offers to the Palestinians for a Palestinian state. And they are literally screaming in downtown New York, Detroit, Toronto, London, we don't want a two-state, we want all of it.
From the river to the sea.
Right. And so I'm reaching out again, just like my government has reached out time and time again to make peace. I am reaching out on social media saying, let's try to at least have a conversation. And they're like, no, we want all of it. So what am I supposed to answer to that?
On this not so optimistic note, Ashley Bakshi, thank you so much, Ashley. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming.